All right, so John, you've had quite the illustrious career and quite the academic career. It seems like I would probably put you at least 10 units of smartness above me. And so, you want to give us a little bit of a background on? I like this idea of what you did in college, especially as you exceeded or excelled past the bachelor realm. What was it? What'd you do? Tell us a little bit about that.
All right, so my story's a little weird. So I started out in Norway. That's where I'm originally from, and
Hmm. Much
I just sort
lutefisk?
of sorry,
Lutefisk?
yeah, lutefisk. We all collectively hate it, but pretend to foreigners that we like it.
I used to eat it every Christmas. It
Yep,
was a requirement in my family. We're very
that's
Norwegian around
fantastic.
here. Yeah, I had to eat a
Yeah, I
lot of it.
mean, usually you eat it for the condiments. Like the fish is there so that you can scrape it to the side of the plate, and then you eat like the honey and brown cheese and stuff instead. It's
Okay, I
great.
thought it was just a way to get more butter into my system.
I mean that too. Just
Okay,
anything but the fish. That's the
anything but the
important part.
fish.
Yeah. So I'm from Norway originally, and while I was there, computer science wasn't really a thing. Like there were no classes in computer science, so I just sort of did it on the side. And then when I finished high school and was like looking for bachelors, I was like, uh, I guess I'll start like an intro to CS course,
Yeah,
and started taking it and was bored out of my mind.
naturally.
And then a friend of mine was like, I'm going to Australia for film school. Why don't you just come with? I think as a joke. But I was like, fuck it, why not? And so like a few months later, I moved to Australia to do a bachelor's there.
Classic
Um,
computer scientist, though, not catching on to social cues. Hey, just
oh
come to
yeah,
Australia.
exactly.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
coming.
exactly. That's pretty much what happened. I think they all hate me now. It's fine.
Okay, that's
Uh,
fine. Yeah,
it was fun though because I ended up being used as basically a prop and stand-in for all of their various like film and TV shoots, which was a lot of fun.
nice. Are
Um,
you a part of the Actors Guild? Did you have to apply
no,
to anything,
no,
or
I'm
this
not
was just
prestigious enough.
amateur? Okay, this is just
Yeah,
amateur hour stuff. It wasn't.
yeah. No, I'm entirely an amateur, but I got to like hold mics every now and again and stuff, so that was
Okay.
fun. Um, and then, fast forward a little bit, I basically chose lots of random subjects over the course of that bachelor. So you're supposed to like follow a major and stuff. I
Yeah.
didn't do that. So I have two majors in general computer science. So you're supposed to pick two majors
There's
as part of that bachelor. And they're supposed to be like information security and algorithms or something.
okay.
Mine are
So
just too
majors,
general.
does majors like refer to it in this case, because this is not the term we would use? Is a major effectively like a class that you take like three class, or like a niche that you take three
Yeah.
classes in? So
Yeah. It's like a
algorithms you take.
specialization of the bachelor.
Okay, so you take. Okay. So a major is a
And
specialization. Okay.
Yeah, and I basically didn't specialize. So I took subjects that were everything from like Unix sysadmin tools to
Dude, that's
data
so awesome.
structure to like computer science entrepreneurship. So my subjects were just all over the place. So they didn't know what to call it. So they just gave me a double general in computer science.
I think that's the way to go, though. I mean, honestly, the Tour de France approach gives you like the full kind of idea of what is available. I wish I
I
would
mean,
have
that was
taken
my thinking
more
too.
things, right, myself.
Yeah, and I think also at the time I was like, I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah,
I don't know what is the coolest thing. I wanted sample,
yeah.
right?
I do. I still
Um,
don't even really know what I want to do, and I'm over a decade past college.
yep.
Barely though. It took me 8 years to get through college, and I'm not a doctor, but just a regular guy.
I mean, I don't think I know either. Like I still feel like I'm fiddling with a bunch of different areas where I'm like,
Hmm.
this is really cool, but I can't choose one. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. Changes
Um,
changes the spice of life, right?
yep.
Ah, all right. So you
And then
kept on
so
going,
that
right? I
yeah,
assume.
so then I moved on to the UK. I lived in London for a few years and did my master's there. And my master's was in like networking. It had nothing to do with my
Hmm.
bachelor and nothing to do with what I do now. It was all like wireless networking and like low level networking parts of the stack. And
Fun.
then I did, yeah, sorry, good.
I said that's fun. Now you do a little Shannon's theorem. Was your master's, was seeing how much of a pipe could get filled?
It was a little bit of that, and then a little bit of the thing I was looking at in particular was like Wi-Fi interference. Like what happens if you
Mm.
run lots of Wi-Fi networks and just like send shit tons of traffic through each one? How much worse do they get compared
Answer
to
is
one another?
bad,
And that was
right?
interesting.
Answer is
It's pretty
bad.
bad.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's really bad.
Is it an exponential curve to 100, or like an inverse tangent curve, or is it a logarithmic curve?
So it's It ends up being logarithmic because they end up sort of sharing towards the end. But
Okay.
it also depends on how close they are in channels in the Wi-Fi spectrum. But this was also like back before like Wi-Fi N and MIMO and stuff. So everything is probably better now. But also the future is shit, so it's probably broken.
Sorry
Nice.
about that. All right. Anyways,
No, no,
back to
you're fine.
networking.
Don't worry about it.
I just used some
Uh,
wireless networking right there.
and it
What
somehow worked.
I know it somehow worked. There's not a lot of interference here. I live in South Dakota. Just like just the radiation from birds mostly is the only kind of radiation that we get around here. And I've intentionally
Isn't
removed
the
all the.
current consensus the birds aren't real though?
Yeah, they're robots, government spy drones. So that's the
Right.
radiation, right? They're
Yeah,
emitting
so
some
so
sort of
they
rays.
presumably interfere a lot with your Wi-Fi and wireless connectivity.
That's why Wi-Fi always sucks when you see a swarm of birds. It's a fact,
That's
well
right.
known fact.
As we all know.
Yeah, I mean I've known that for years, even before I
Yeah.
realized that they're spy drones. But it
And
was a
then
logarithmic
after
suckness.
so after my master's, I actually did I did a research project also in London on indoor localization, which was actually a little creepy. Or creepy is the wrong word, but so the research project was, can we use, like, if you have multiple Wi-Fi routers, like think,
Yeah.
basically any public space, can we use it to triangulate where the sender of the Wi-Fi signal is? And we were able to build a thing that like tracked you indoor in real time without you noticing, down to about 23 centimeters.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can imagine that would definitely happen, and it probably is already happening constantly all the time.
Yep. And
Yeah.
there was a point, so during that research, like we published a paper on it and stuff, and there was a point I remember where there were like people from the British government who came in to like check on our research. I was like, this is weird.
Anyone from the U.S. government as well? Yeah, we're just
No, but
here,
then
just a
again,
bunch
would
of
I know if
cowboys.
there were?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's super sus. Oh my goodness. I mean, the reality is none of that should be super shocking, in the sense
No.
that the constant extraction of information that you give off freely that you don't realize is just going to always be done. And who knows how much stuff actually goes into these hardware. I mean, I've heard many stories where people can't identify stuff in hardware you buy. We're not allowed to plug in devices just freely onto the network at Netflix because, like stuff just starts happening. We have some
Yep.
trusted list of devices. Like, it's a weird world out there. A lot of
I
communication
mean,
goes on.
I'm sufficiently paranoid about this stuff that I have like a little, I think it's called like a USB condom. So it's this like little
Hmm.
red device that you plug into USB ports in like airplanes and stuff, and then you plug your cable into that, and it only allows power through and no data. Because
Oh,
I don't
interesting.
trust devices.
Oh, I never even thought about that. But yeah, why not, right? Why couldn't it do stuff?
Oh yeah, no,
Oh my
it's
goodness.
terrifying. Like there are some really interesting security hacks that are basically like you plug in a device over USB and the
Oh no.
host device exploits your device and then leaves like a little rootkit there, so the next time you plug it into your computer's fucked.
Ugh.
Yep. That was my first
My
reaction to
anxiety
it.
levels just went up 5% right there. I can
Yep.
feel it at this very moment. Now I'm gonna go buy a bunch of condoms,
USB
USB
condoms.
condoms.
Yeah,
Do
exactly.
they come in
Just
USB
don't get
C?
real ones. That's not going to help you.
Yeah, yeah. But because I don't use magnums anymore with USBs. I'm all about that USB C. So do they have like mini condom finger cots for them?
That's a good question. I only have them for USB-A, but
Okay.
I should get one for USB-C. But
Yeah,
when are airlines going to give you USB-C? That's not going to be for like 20 years.
that's
They,
true.
they don't upgrade their stuff.
We'll already be on USB D. Have you heard of the USB D?
USB-D?
Yeah, USB
Or do you
D's
mean
nuts.
USB-PD?
I
Because that's
just
also a thing.
Yeah, I just snuck that in. Okay, anyways, it was missed, but it's okay. Don't worry about it. It doesn't really matter. Okay, I needed to get in a D's nuts joke at least once in this. All right, got
No,
him.
that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. I like it.
All right. Anyway, so you did research. You were able to triangulate people, and then you stopped there. Was that the end of your
Yeah,
collegiate
because
career?
I was interested in other stuff. Like as part of that work, I did like GPU acceleration and like multi-threaded stuff to be able to compute this stuff real time. And I was like, that stuff is cool, like concurrency and data structures and algorithms.
Yeah,
So I should do distributed systems, which is like my next conclusion. I don't know why.
that kind of
And
makes sense.
then
It's a natural jump.
yeah, yeah, and so I ended up at MIT at the Parallel and Distributed Operating Systems group, where I got to do research on that kind of stuff, and that was really fun, but also like a very long 6 years uh, of constant studies. But that
Yeah.
was really fun. I built this it's basically a database in Rust that is the basic take of it is it knows your queries. So you tell it about your queries ahead of time, and it like creates this big program that's running continuously and computes the results of your queries sort of proactively, so that when
Okay.
you do queries, they do go super fast rather than having to compute on every read.
Is this
So
just
it
a
sort of
bunch of
shifts
macro
the query
magic?
load from write to read.
You have to like compile it ahead of time. You give it your query, you give it your effectively your SQL. I call it squeal. You give it your squeal, and then you compile your program, and then you launch that program. Is that what happens, or is it more
You
runtime?
don't have to fully like pre-compile. You basically run it as like a little program, almost like a cache between you and the database. So
Okay.
it can be mostly transparent to your application, but you give it your squeal and it internally constructs the appropriate data flow to compute the results as the data changes.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. I like that. That's actually pretty clever. Did it pick up any steam? Did it go anywhere? Do I know the name of it? Are you about to just
So
drop?
the research project was called Noria, and it got a decent amount of attention from like the Rust community and the database community. I didn't take it anywhere further, although I helped co-found a company called ReadySet that are now like making it a real product that you can like
Okay.
run in production. The thing I built was more of like a research prototype to like demonstrate that this is possible. But it turns out, the delta between I can run it on my systems for a research paper and I
Yeah.
want to run it in production and have real users use
So,
it. There's like a pretty big gap.
yeah, it's like the last 20%, right? That's all it is.
Yep. Yep.
Just a
The
little
last
20%.
20% that takes 80% of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, it's just
Yep.
that last little bit. That's actually pretty awesome. And so you were able to kind of get this going. Some other companies running with it. Were you actually able to see real gains? Did you do real research, or did you kind of? It was a little bit canned research in the sense that you're like, look at how great this data looks. All right.
No, also I tried really hard to make it be a real thing. Like one
Okay.
thing that bothers me a lot about academia is it's especially computer science is that it's so easy to build a thing where like theoretically I can show that this is 100 times faster
Yeah.
on appropriate workloads.
Yeah.
And I wanted this to be like A, it should be a thing that other people can run, and B, it should actually matter for real applications.
Yeah.
So what I did was I reached out to the people who run Lobsters, which is like it's sort of like Hacker News,
Okay.
but it's open source. Um, and I got in touch with the admins there and got access to like statistics over all of their like access loads and data distributions and stuff. And then I built a workload generator that like generates page loads and SQL queries appropriate to what the real site does. And then I ran that against, just regular MySQL and MySQL with Memcached and with my thing. And it's like 10x faster,
Nice. Okay, that's really
which
cool.
is, that's pretty substantial.
No, that's very, very substantial because database becomes very quickly a bottleneck because those joins get very confusing very, very quickly,
Yep.
and it just blows everything up.
Also, it was like a combination, right? So I wanted it to be faster, but I also wanted, there are all these applications out there where people have like hand rolled their own caching logic. And
Yeah.
it's a massive pain to maintain, right? There's just like thousands of line of like complex
I wrote Falcor,
stuff.
so I know all about this. That was a JavaScript side caching library that you'd make these HTTP requests. If you've seen the meme where the person gets 200 back and then they open it up
Yep.
and it says error inside of there,
Yep.
I literally was one of the originators of the said meme. And it is very,
Yep.
very, very painful. Caching is
It
extremely
sucks.
hard. And
Yep.
someone always inevitably, when it comes to caching, asks for this one thing, which is the worst thing. I want to set something into the cache that when you set it in, it is immediately invalidated except for this request, right? Like some sort of zero time life caching thing. And you're just like, dude, why are you asking for this? It
Yeah. Why are
always
you
happens.
using this way?
I know every time it's
Yep.
gonna ruin my life. You're literally
Yep.
ruining my life with that question. And so yeah, that was
Yeah, my other favorite is people who want to cache things that will never remain valid. Like stuff where you like cache a query where you're then immediately going to do a write that invalidates the cache.
Yep.
Like it's just there was no reason to cache it in the first place.
You
It makes
see it
no
all the time.
sense.
Can I tell you one fun story about Netflix and
Yeah, go
the
for it.
Falcor? So if you get anything about Falcor, effectively what it was, you can imagine an array of like strings, and each one of those would be an index into the object. It could be a symlink, so that way you can you can have the live free die hard referenced a bunch of times. So just imagine a file system, symlinking and all that. Um, and so you can make these requests to servers. Say you give it a long path and the path doesn't exist, but you don't know where in the path it doesn't exist, and you don't want to overwrite or destroy symlinks. So what we'd do is we'd add an extra little option called materialize at the end of it, which would go, the server would go, okay, this path doesn't exist here. I'm going to send you back the cache fragment that you need to insert into your path. That will be stored, and so you will know that you haven't broken it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to play with it. And everyone, they made it. It was fantastic, all that. And then I started thinking about, like, what does that actually do? And so I wrote a query that effectively looked like foo 0 through 100, 0 through 100, 0 through 100, 0 through 100 bar materialize. And I took down all of staging, all of test, all of integration with a single small script. And I was just like, hey, I could take down entirely Netflix and there is no path forward. You cannot revert this change because it has been in for years. And it was like Netflix had they called it a repulsive grizzly attack. I could just permanently shut down Netflix. And that's all I'd have to do. And so it took us 2 years to fix this bug. It was like the most egregious bug ever. And it was introduced by me also.
Yep.
I mean, both identified it and introduced it. But, it feels really good to know that I could have destroyed Netflix permanently.
Yep. It's awful when you find those bugs where you're just like poking around and you're like, I took down production.
I know, you're like, oh shit. And it's all with caching? Dang it. How did I ruin it with caching? This is the worst. This is supposed to be the best thing.
Yep. No, the problem is anytime the server does something on behalf of a user, it's bad.
Yeah.
Which is what servers do all the time, which means the servers are bad.
Servers
but of course,
are
we have
inherently
nothing better.
problematic, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you've done all that, and then now you've sold off your little piece of software or gave it away or whatever you did, and then now you're going into the real world, I assume, at this point, quote unquote real world.
Yeah. So that was the plan. So my girlfriend got me this mug, which I'm very happy about, that just says "fucking done." I don't know if you can see this with the reflection.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I got that and I was like, okay, time to return to the real world now.
Yeah.
And so I joined AWS back in like November 2020. Like
Okay.
basically I had 1 day off and then I started working.
Man, you didn't put any
COVID pandemic, whatnot.
Yeah. You were already at home all the time, so you're like, well, might as well be on a keyboard at this point.
Yep. And like, it's not like I can take a vacation. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And then
you could have come to South Dakota. Well, we could have rode bikes.
Would that have been a nice vacation? Is South Dakota
bears.
Nice?
It's beautiful. First off, I live there, so it's fantastic.
Those are not the same.
Second
you
off,
living there does not mean it's nice.
It is very, very nice. Okay, it rains regularly. We get water. There's hills.
Oh, I love rain.
Yeah,
it does not rain here. This is a desert.
Are you're in the Bay?
I'm in LA.
Oh, you're in LA, the even worse version of the Bay. You get no rain, plus you get clouds that don't actually contain rain. Just too much people. That's what it contains.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a breath of fresh air. You might say. Anyways, yeah.
I feel like South Dakota would remind me more of home.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's hilly with some rocks. It's not super mountainous, but yeah. Okay. So, anyways, you joined AWS. You've been doing distributed systems now for quite some time, so you're probably feeling pretty fresh. But now you're entering into the real world. Was there like some oddities? Like, what did you find to be the most kind of like shocking or culture shocking for you? Because now you're in a real work environment, if you will. Real.
It's real. Is anything ever real?
Yeah.
It was interesting because when I joined AWS, initially I was like, I'm going to do distributed systems there, surely. But that's not actually what I ended up joining to do. Instead, what I joined to do is work on the like build tooling and build infrastructure for Rust at AWS. So I'm not even doing distributed systems, even though that's AWS's big thing and that's my background. Just no.
Okay, that's pretty good though. So how has that been? Because obviously getting, I assume getting Rust, getting build systems, especially like, I mean, I work at a big company. Changing how something is done is exceptionally painful. It's not only is it half the time political, it's also just, there's just also, it's not inept isn't the right word, but maybe apathy towards change as well. And so how's that? How is that?
It's weird because on the one hand, it can be very, it can be a bit of a slog to get anything changed because you're sort of you're at the bottom of the build graph, right? So any change you make has this like outsized impact. So it can be frustrating because you need to really make sure that the changes you make aren't going to break something out there. But on the other hand, it means that you have this like force multiplier effect, right? Where if I make an improvement, I can make the lives of everyone
Hmm.
using Rust at AWS better, and then they will make everything else better in return, right? So
Yep.
there was a change like early on that I made that reduced like um, clean build times by 30 seconds or something.
How
Which
long are
like
these build times?
doesn't matter if something takes an hour to build, but if
Yeah.
it takes a minute to build, 30 seconds is
Yeah.
a lot.
So how long did it
Um,
take to build?
well, so it depends, right? It depends on whatever, like, because I went vend the build tool. The challenge is how fast does the thing I build their stuff, and that depends on the
Yeah.
size of their stuff. But for a lot of it, is like, people picking up Rust or experimenting with Rust on their team, and they're like, "Why does this thing take 40 seconds to build?" And the answer was 30 of the seconds was spent on stupid shit that the build tool shouldn't be doing,
Nice.
right?
Okay.
And
Nice.
so cutting that time made a huge impact to the
Yeah.
productivity of everyone using Rust, which is a very cool thing to be able to do, right?
Yeah, you're
So
probably
that's
even
like the
compiling
flip
faster than
side.
TypeScript at that point. You're producing a compiled language faster than an interpreted language is being
Yeah,
reinterpreted.
and everyone knows that Rust compile time are always great, right?
Always
So
great.
that's
It's well
yeah,
known. Everybody knows that. It's safe.
it's safe, and it's always fast for everything. And it's
Always fast.
always the right answer.
Always the right answer. Definitely never
Yeah.
been any problems with it. All right, so yeah,
No,
so you've been
no.
doing that. One of the hard parts I find being on these types of teams is that you make a decision early on that feels like the right decision to make at the time, but then it ends up being like a force negative multiplier. Have you ran into any of these things where you've made decisions that you wish you would have just like, oh my goodness, if I could just go back?
Well, so I'm actually in a slightly different position in that when I came in, there was already a build system that was developed by a sort of community of excited Rust people internally. Like there
Okay.
wasn't an official build tool, but there was like one made by the Rust community internally. And it was really good compared to many of the other build tools, but it committed me to every decision that that build tool
Yep.
had made. And so it's not so much that I wish I could take back my own decisions as I
Yeah.
wish I could take back some of theirs.
Yeah. No, I get that.
um, but what has been exciting though is uh, I, the Rust community internally are just really passionate about using Rust,
Hmm.
and so
Really,
they're
they
very
are.
engaged as a community.
I actually have met
Yeah,
very, very few people that are passionate about using Rust.
that's a good point. Yeah, I think the AWS people are probably outliers
Okay.
and probably just weird because no one in the real world cares.
Yeah, no, no one does, and
Yeah.
it's not like I mean, I'm sure the Stack Overflow survey that says it's the most loved language was just the AWSers
Oh
filling it
yeah.
out
Yeah.
with
Of course.
distributed power of AWS.
That's exactly right. Utilize the Rust evangelism strike force is really just all of the AWS Rust users.
Yeah, that makes sense. That
Yep.
makes perfect sense. All right, so there's things in this tool that are difficult, all that. And, I've heard a lot about Amazon. If it's a fine, we can keep on going down this route. But I've heard a lot about Amazon. How was the effort you had to put in? Did you find that it was easy to kind of balance your life with what Amazon expects?
Yeah, I one thing that's weird about Amazon internally is that it's a lot of fairly disjoint teams. Like it almost
Yeah.
feels like there's a bunch of startups that are like loosely connected. Like if I want something from another team, it's really more like a sort of customer relationship, right?
Hmm.
Where I ask them for something and they might just say, "No, fuck off." Right? Like it's just not
Yeah.
it's not the sort of the normal like tightly coupled architecture. And this also means that teams vary a lot between one another, and I think I was very lucky with the team I ended up on. Because I've been given a lot of sort of flexibility and leeway to sort of do things my own way. Like I don't feel much pressure in terms of like having to work more or anything like that. Quite to the contrary, I feel like there's a lot of trust in I know what needs to be done. Like I have the expertise in the area I'm working in, and I know how to best use my time. And so what matters is, do I deliver like, in corporate speak, value to my
Yeah.
customers, as in the internal Rust users? That's all that really matters. If I started to like lag on that metric, then of course there'd be consequences. But in general, there's like not a lot of hand holding or micromanagement at all.
So, follow-up question: since your customers are a highly motivated, highly loving,
Opinionated.
highly opinionated, oh, very opinionated,
Yeah.
but
Oh
also
yeah.
like, they're using Rust. They're very, very pleased. Do you find that it makes your job easier that you have people that are so invested in, or does it make your job harder that every single decision receives its own pre-built bike shed with all the colors of the rainbow to paint on it?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Although I would say on the whole, there's been a lot of, I think, confidence and excitement about me sort of taking on the effort, because previously what they had was, it was just community supported, so everything was a long running discussion where
Mm-hmm.
nothing got decided and
Yeah.
ultimately no change was made because no one had the time. And now, I can actually contribute like full-time resources to build this thing and making it better. So far there's been a lot of like, just go, just do, make everything better, just do it.
Nice.
Every now and again we sort of get bogged down in discussions, but on the whole it's been pretty pleasant.
Okay.
um
What about how does that do you have like more people working with you? Is it just you doing this kind of monumentous effort, or have you been able to get a team or create a vision around it?
so it used to just be me. So for the first year and a
Mm.
half it was just me. And then now very recently we've hired into my team, so we recently hired two people. And one of them is Tim McNamara, who wrote Rust in Action, which has been really
Yep.
cool.
That's the first book I
um
read on Rust, was that one.
yep. So the three of us are now like the ones doing that work. And it does make a huge difference whether you are one person or more than one person.
Yeah.
Like currently, I've sort of been in this mode, right, where for the past year and a half, anytime there's a fire, which is a lot of the time,
Yeah.
um, I have to be the one working on it, which means I can't do other things. And now finally there are multiple people, and so we can like spread the fires out.
Nice, nice. Okay. So it's making things easier. You're moving faster. So you've done a lot of Rust. Obviously, you're even doing it professionally, helping people do that. What are some of the biggest pitfalls you're seeing with Rust, kind of in the more production setting? Because there's obviously a lot of jokes that go around, and one of the most popular phrases are, "There's languages that everyone complains about and languages that aren't used." Right? I think it goes something like that. That was the
Sounds about
creator
right.
of C++, um, I believe, said that.
Nice.
I didn't want to say such derogatory terms on the stream.
It does make me yeah,
Triggered. Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sensitive too. I understand.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what are some of the
Uh
big pitfalls? What are the things you're seeing that Rust is going to have to address, or is it community culture that has to address some of these things?
you know, the, in some sense my answer is there are a lot. And I think the question is, to what extent are they surmountable obstacles? Because for, the language you mentioned previously, um we have this problem where many of the problems are at this point not reasonable to fix. Like they're so baked into
Yeah.
everything that fixing them isn't really feasible. For Rust, I think there are some things that are problematic, but I think for most of them, we can sort of see some light in the distance for how we might get through them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the top contenders are um, Asynchronous Rust, like the story there. And this is arguably obvious. Like this is what everyone complains about,
Yeah.
but there are challenges there around a sort of fundamental disconnect between what Rust sort of promises and what we deliver. Because Rust sort of is supposed to promise that if it compiles, it runs,
Yeah.
or some variant of that. And that is true for a lot of Rust code. But for async Rust, there are a bunch of cases where that just isn't true. Um, and I think that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, rightfully so.
Okay.
Um,
Can you give us an example? What do you mean by that? I'm kind of curious about that. Are you just talking about
sure.
just mutex deadlock, or what are we talking?
So there was a pretty good blog post on this by Nico Matsakis a while back, but basically, one of the things that comes up a lot is this problem called async cancellation. And the basic idea is, imagine that you have a future that is, say, reading from a network socket. And you have a different future, and it's like trying to parse a JSON object from it or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have another future that's like waiting for a timeout, or waiting for
Yeah.
whatever. Let's say timeout is fine. So you do like a select between the two, and whichever happens first, you're going to work on that. And then you
Mm-hmm.
do some stuff, and then you loop and you do it again.
Yeah.
So the problem is that, imagine you have the select and you end up going into the timer timeout branch. Then the other future might have read some bytes, but not enough bytes to parse the JSON object.
Mm-hmm.
But that means they've been taken out of the TCP stream. So when that future gets dropped and you do the work related to the timeout and then you loop around again and you try to reparse from the TCP stream, you've now lost some of the bytes,
Yeah.
right? Because they were in the future that were dropped. And so now that is just broken forever. It's never going to get the initial part of that JSON object again or whatever it read out.
Wouldn't that be the same problem though in all languages? You could imagine the same thing with even JavaScript, right? You could, if you had some sort of stream of input that has some sort of async nature to it, you're just reading from a raw TCP socket. You have no guarantee on when it's happening, and if you only read the
The
first 10,000 bytes, you have a
the
timeout.
big difference is that in Rust, futures are that they only do work when you pull them, like when you await them.
Yeah.
And so, whereas in JavaScript, like with promises, the future is always running in the background. It never actually gets canceled. So when you go around again, you're basically going to be awaiting the same promise, and it has been allowed to continue running. It never dropped its data.
Okay.
Um, and so this is like a very subtle problem case for async Rust code, and it's not one that you run into a lot. But when it happens, it's extremely counterintuitive and hard to debug.
Okay.
And this is something the language should be guarding you against, and we just don't quite know how yet.
Yeah, because it's very hard to understand the intent, because there could be the intent that you don't want to read anything because it didn't complete. Give it again, right?
Yeah, or it could be that you intend for that future to actually like only consume things from the TCP stream in like amounts that you know will constitute a full object,
Yeah.
right? Like who knows what the intention was, but the reality is that when you try to write code like this, your code is just going to panic. Like it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um,
It's not. It's definitely not a trivial problem. I'm very
no.
curious if you can even solve it. What are some other ones? Because that's a fairly subtle one that I think the 99% aren't going to run into. At least as far as I can tell, right?
Well, it's tricky, right? Because the challenge arises whenever you do something like a select. And so where this really bites you is, in your application code, you have a select between two things that seem entirely unrelated. And then somewhere deep down the hood, one of them reads from a TCP stream. Then this might actually affect your application much farther up the stack.
Okay.
Right. So it's one of those things where it might just bite you out of nowhere. And that's disturbing.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
What's
but
the
to
current
take
fix
another
for that?
example, okay, so something else that is annoying about async in
Yeah.
Rust, that is much more user visible is the lack of async functions and traits, right? So if you have a trait, you can't write an async function in there; it just
Hmm.
doesn't work.
Isn't there
Um,
some sort of
a-
macro right now that allows for async traits?
yeah, so there's a crate called async trait
Hmm.
that's written by David Tolnay, who makes a lot of the cool stuff in the Rust ecosystem, and what it does is basically turn async fn into just a regular function that returns a boxed future. And that generally works. The big downside with it is that it has to do a heap allocation for every future.
Hmm.
And that's usually fine for like high level applications. But imagine you writing something like at one point I wrote an implementation of the MySQL binary protocol in Rust. And so I had a trait that represented reading a byte from the connection, like reading a U32 from the connection.
Yeah.
And if every single read of a U32 goes through a heap allocation and deallocation, that's not okay anymore.
Yeah. That quickly gets out of control.
And then this gets back to, again, like Rust's promise is this like zero cost, high performance business. And when we have this primitive that just doesn't support that very low in the stack, it propagates all the way up and you see all these high costs that shouldn't need to be there.
Is there an actual path forward on these async traits, or is it kind of just like baked into the cake?
No, there is. So this is, let me see if I can dig up this baby steps. So Nico Matakis has a blog called Baby Steps, and it's on smallcultfollowing.com, which I think is a fantastic
That's a great name.
domain. Um, and in particular, he has a sort of blog post series on basically how do we solve this problem? How do we get async fn in traits? How do we get async drop? All of that stuff. Let me see if I can dig that up and
Yeah, if you dig it up,
send
please
here.
throw it in the chat. People will see it on the YouTube video right here. And so yeah, just
Yeah.
paste it in. Ooh, it looks like a rocker. We got it. Is it
Yeah, and then
async
the other
fn and
one
traits
here
are
is
hard?
a study specifically of async cancellation.
Okay, cool. These are two good ones that you should probably go and check out, huh?
Yeah, they're great, especially if you're like curious about these problems and the ways in which Rust itself, like Rust as a language, might change in order to support them. These are really good write-ups.
Is Rust so C++ obviously one of its big problems is
Hey,
that
hey, hey, hey,
oh
hey.
oh my goodness. I mean next thing you know I'm going to be saying code, and all that kind of stuff, like right
Oh,
here on stream. I know.
just I can't even. I can't even.
I'm sorry. Do we need to just cancel this right now?
Yeah, can you just like wipe the last and then we'll just go back and
Okay. So with C++, obviously it's weighted under all the decisions it's been making for a long, long time. Is Rust? Because I know I've read that they're keeping a lot of compatibility and all that. Is there any? Will they break compatibility to make things better in the future, or is that just a simple no?
It's a little bit of a complicated question because the on the can it says no,
Yeah.
right? So the stated stance of Rust is we will not make breaking changes, and I think that will remain true for the foreseeable future and possibly forever. But there's this like sneaky loophole around this bit with additions, right? So with Rust additions, they have a way of saying you can opt into breaking changes. Um, and that allows them to do some things that are, kind of not backwards compatible, but it required an explicit opt-in, so it's fine. Um,
Does there come a point where everyone opts in and you just have to break it, or are they going to forever have this? Because that seems like
well, so
it seems
well, so
nice
that's
now,
one of the things that's neat
but
is
it
that this
blows up.
opt-in mechanism is per crate. So
Okay.
if you opt in, I can still use you even if I didn't opt in.
Okay. Okay.
Which means that it's actually okay. Um, but for like
Hmm.
the best example I can think of here is there's a discussion about whether we should have uh, l- lacy cell or once cell in the standard library. Um, I don't know if you know what these
I don't
are.
know quite what they are. I've used one cell once, but I don't. I think I just was copying and pasting code, and I'm not super into the cell area as it is. But I haven't got to that
Yeah, that's
level of
fine.
rustationing. But
Yeah, that's fine. There's basically a discussion of there are these two crates in the ecosystem that provide a similar kind of functionality, but in slightly different ways. And one of them has sort of landed in the standard library, and they're trying to figure out that they should replace it with the other approach. And there's a lot of discussion of should we remove the old one because we know it's bad, or should
mm,
we just mark it as deprecated and keep it forever? Um, and there's a lot of discussion about is this right or is it not. And I don't think we have a good answer to it. The thread is over here. I'm gonna put it in chat. So like I do think the Rust language has some of these where things are considered mistakes and they can only be fixed at additions, or some things just cannot be fixed. There is, in fact, on the Rust issue tracker, there is a tag specifically for issues that we wish we could fix, but we can't.
hmm
Let me see if I can. There's like a wish list for Rust 2.0, which is basically issues that will never happen. Uh, yeah, Rust 2 breakage wish list. This one.
if you were quote unquote more in charge, would you make these breaking changes? Do you
Oh,
see that there's a problem to that?
no, and the answer is because I think backwards compatibility is very important to sustain the language. I think maybe one day we could get away with it, but that day is not now. Right?
Hmm.
Look at something like Python 2 to 3,
Yeah,
right?
I
That
Python
hurt
2 is
Python's
still there.
credibility a lot, but
Yeah.
Python was super popular at the time, much more so than Rust is now. And so it sort of survived that change, even though, you know, there's still a big split in that ecosystem. I don't think Rust can afford to do that right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because
Uh,
just a language frustrating curve as it is to get into a point of proficiency, which I mean, even I still don't consider myself like greatly proficient with it. But even with that, if you were to break things and then I'd have to relearn, it would just feel even more frustrating on top of it. That I could see myself
yeah,
being like, just go with go. It's just easier.
yep.
You're gonna win. 10 out of 10
I think
times.
the even bigger issue is actually around teaching, where what the way most people program is they run into a problem, they look it up, they go to Stack Overflow, they copy paste the code. And that is a workflow that we want to support as a language, right?
Hmm.
Because if we did a breaking change to the language, you might do that, copy paste the code, and then it doesn't work, even though it used to work. And it doesn't work because, something in the syntax has changed. And that is a major barrier to people just being able to cobble together a working program. And it hinders a lot of experimentation, right?
Hmm. So I guess I see this all the time, which is that there's a lot of very popular libraries that you could argue are more used by more people that do make breaking changes all the time. That people have to either stick with the old version or burn down and rebuild. And so, like, is this notion within a language? Do you think it's going to keep on going, or do you think that the younger crowd, say all the people in the TypeScript world who are like, "Well, I was on React 16, now I'm on 18, and I have to break all these things, and it's completely different." And oh, this was bad. It once, was use effect was the greatest thing ever. Use effect is now completely out of fashion. Should never use it, right? Like, is there a group of people coming up that this argument doesn't make much sense for them?
Um, so I think there's a difference between the argument not making sense and people being used to it,
Hmm.
right? I do think this is something people are getting used to, is like you have to deal with breaking changes. Or if you're a vendor, you know that you're going to have to do breaking changes. And so they might be used to that coming into Rust. But I think breaking the language is fairly different from breaking a library, right? Because the language affects everyone, whereas the library only affects a very small number of people. Or
Yeah,
compared to the total set, right? Like if there's a breaking change to Tokyo, right, the asynchronous runtime, that affects a large proportion of Rust users, but not all of them.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and whenever as a library vendor, what you want to think about when deciding whether to do a breaking change is, how many users do I have? And that sort of dictates how often you can get away with making them. If half of Rust users use your thing, you should probably not do breaking changes more often than every like 4 or 5 years. But if there are two people using your thing, you can breaking changes all the time and it's fine.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Okay. All right, I get that. So you've been at Amazon now for almost 2 years, right? Am I correct on that? Yeah.
yep.
And how long do you see yourself working there? Do you feel like you have too much skin in the game to ever leave? Like, what is it like? What is your future
No,
plans here?
no, not at all. In fact, the reason I joined AWS in the first place was because it was a fairly unique opportunity. Like,
Hmm.
there are not a lot of companies that have a position where you can work full time on the Rust experience, right? Because for
Yep.
most companies, it doesn't make sense to have employees that just work on the language experience,
Yeah.
right? You need them to work on product. If you have a smaller company, that's what you need. If you're a sort of mid-sized company, you might have one person, but you're not going to have a team or an organization.
Yeah.
And most of the bigger companies don't really have, you know, as much of an interest in Rust. Like Google doesn't have a Rust team in a meaningful sense.
Yeah.
Um,
They're pretty committed to go, I hear.
right, right. Which good for them.
Yeah.
They can have it. It's fine. Um,
They can go get
but
it.
they can go get it. Yeah, exactly. Or go get fucked.
Yeah.
Uh,
Whichever one.
whichever one. But uh, AWS and Meta, I think, are the only two companies
Yep.
that really have like Rust teams. And at the time when I was looking for work, Meta was not really hiring remotely, which was a non-starter for me. And AWS was the other one. And so for me, that was an opportunity to like really make a difference on the Rust ecosystem, both by enabling Amazon to adopt it more broadly, which I think is good for Rust, just by getting
Yep.
more money, more adoption into the language. But also because it's a role where I could continue contributing to Rust. Like I can do Rust streams, or Rust education, and work on Cargo, work on Rust C as part of my job. And that makes me excited. I don't know that this will remain true forever, right? Like I think down the line, both there are going to be other companies where this is going to be possible,
Hmm.
but also the language might get to a point where I'm like, okay, I feel like I've done like my part. Now I want to work on like a product, or I want to work on a tool that is public, or for that matter, it might get to the point where I want to just do full time, teaching and working on the open source bits that I maintain out there. That's not feasible right now. But however many years down the line, I think that is something that I would enjoy a lot. As my experience has been too, I don't like to stick with the same thing for too long, because I think you get sort of ground into this track
Yeah.
where you stop being productive, but also you stop being what's the word?
Curious.
Creative or
Yeah.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like I worry about working on this internal Rust build system for so long that I get sort of single-minded in what it should be doing.
Yeah.
And I want to give it over to other people.
Yeah, it's very it becomes very easy to get abstracted from what it's actually like doing something. And then you
Yep.
start coming up with these ideas that feel really good and they appear very good on paper, but then, the people using it are like, dude, this is
Yep.
just missing lately. It's just not good.
Yeah, and I think build tools in particular has this problem because you you think you know what's best for the build tool, but if you're not building anything with it,
Yeah.
how do you know what the important things are? Right? You need to have conversations with the people using your thing, or ideally be one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I've just recently ranted about my feelings of non-coding architects. That it's all in the same kind of vein or nature,
Oh yeah.
where it's just the abstraction from reality can cause really like long-term, hard and difficult, you know, consequences
Yep.
for it.
Yeah, and I do certainly also worry that the longer you're at, especially one of the big companies, the more you become the person who knows how stuff works. And so you end up getting looped in more in terms of like writing docs or reviewing code because you know how the
Yeah.
pieces fit together. And so you shouldn't waste your time on that coding stuff, right? That's not a feeling I have right now at all, but it is something where I could totally see that becoming true at some
Yep.
point, and I would want to avoid that at all costs. I love coding too much.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a good mentality. I mean, because some people do like those kind of things, but I don't feel, especially in our maybe this moment in time in tech, a lot of it is at least in the valley, at least in the FANG companies, a lot you'll hear a lot about like up leveling. Mentoring always means going into management. Everyone's looking how to increase their impact, if you will, which often that is never emphasized or pointed to as one thing being great at coding, right? It's always
Yeah.
communication, communication, communication. And I feel like you lose a lot of this momentum because you just have a whole group of people who could make awesome change. It's just there's no encouragement to be in that position. Is that true
I
at,
think
at
one of the
Amazon?
reasons, yeah, one of the reasons why it's hard, and I've found this myself too, both in academia and in my current position, is it's really hard to articulate for the size of your impact when that impact is indirect. Right?
Yeah,
If you work on, S3, you can say I made this change and it saved the company $1 billion. Right? Like you have like direct
yeah,
measurements.
yeah,
Whereas for me, if I say I saved half a second on every invocation of cargo at the company.
yeah,
That matters a lot for things like IDE experience for builders, but I can't really say how much it matters in dollars or engineering hours
hmm,
or happiness of people using Rust. So it's very hard for me to demonstrate the impact, even though I know the impact is big.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because even if people are using it, they may not even realize, they may not even actually perceive the benefits of said change.
yep.
It may be a slight incremental kind of perception type issue, which ultimately they're just
Teaching is the
having a
same.
better, they're having a better experience overall, but they have no one way to contribute it to, any
Yep.
one thing. Yeah, it's a difficult thing. Teaching at least you have the benefit of putting things out there in which people either repeat or expand upon. So I always feel like teaching you have a leg up sort of because you can have catchphrases like blazingly fast. And then blazingly fast, every library has the term, like there is kind of a teaching emulation moment in that, which is, people follow and you can at least measure something with that.
That's true. Although, again, let's say I wanted to articulate or try to argue for I should spend half my time on just doing teaching stream at
Mm,
AWS. I think it might be a good use of my time
yeah,
because, as you say, one of the things that's challenging about picking up Rust is there like there's so much to learn. It's hard to really grok the details. You need like there's just a lot of stuff that someone needs to
yeah,
teach you. And I think I could do that. The question is, how do I argue that this is worth it? How
yeah,
can I demonstrate that this shortens the time to learn Rust for the majority of teams looking to adopt Rust at AWS? If I do public streams on Rust, like the connection is so weird and convoluted and indirect
yeah. It's
that
also a 5 year connection, right? As you
yep,
start teaching, as you start doing these things, people are going to go off and there's going to be this long tail of learning. And eventually, Rust or Amazon's going to receive maybe a 5% lift in applications to say Rust is one of their primary languages, right? But
yep,
that's such a long play. And someone has to be committed to being like, hey, engineer, I'm going to pay you a very handsome salary to go do something in which we'll have zero benefit for years on end, and we don't even know if it's going to
Yep.
benefit us. We're just assuming it could.
Yep. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I said earlier that I feel lucky about the team that I'm on, because I do feel like my sort of leadership chain buys into this long-term vision, right? Like I'm in
Yeah.
the builder tools organization at AWS, which is an organization that's made to support the builders with the understanding that that is an important thing to do,
Hmm.
right? So I do feel like I'm able to make some of those arguments without having, the direct evidence, but it is very hard of an argument to make, and I think that's why this position doesn't exist at most companies. I think this is why, there are not a lot of people doing this full time. um I, I
Yeah.
wish it was easier, but I don't have a good way to do it.
Yeah, you're one of two people that I personally know that have been able to work themselves into a position more like this, where you get to spend at least some percentage of your time doing something that's not just directly impacting a product, which is very,
Yeah.
very interesting. So your team, it's expanding. Do you have open positions now? Can you get any of chat excited about potentials for applying, being
We
on?
actually just did a big like hiring wave.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the people filled that we could fill. So
Sag.
for the time
Sorry.
being, I don't have any. I know there's a bunch of like Rust positions at AWS more broadly, but not sadly specifically on the stuff that I'm doing. But that said, I think we're in a position where my team is going to continue to expand, because I think we're like, as Rust grows, right? You need more people to support the growing funnel of developers above us. So the moment I know of more, I will let everyone know.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Fantastic. And I guess the last question is that you have been leaning obviously into a lot of teaching, and you've even written a book. How has that been? Because that's obviously been a much different book. I've read a few of the Rust books at this point, and all of them are very pedantic, would be a good term for them. Yours is very.
Handholdy?
Uh, I wouldn't even. I'm not sure if handholdy is the right term. I always give this as an example: the Rust in Action book, right? To show you like just the intro, like how easy multi-threading is in Rust, right? This fearless concurrency, right, is I think the term he uses throughout it. But in the beginning, to show you that, there's 3 pages on Mandelbrot sets and a small section of code going into concurrency. There's effectively zero explanation of what's actually happening, but you get mathed for pages. And it feels really, pedantic's not quite the right term. Potentially, if there was a version of religious piety, but in the math world, right? It
Yeah, I
feels
see
like
what you
that, where you're
mean.
getting looked down on because you're like, oh gosh, yeah, I guess we're gonna explain complex numbers now. Here we go, we're multiplying, like it's not. It doesn't feel like I'm learning anything useful. I'm just simply seeing how smart someone is who wrote a book, and eventually I
Mm,
might get something out of it. Whereas I found your book, every page was consumable, right? Each page
mm.
had something on it that I was like, oh, I'm taking something out of it, right? Not just getting, you know, math splained.
Yeah, I this was a long discussion I had with my editor and publisher for the book too, of like, should you use more words here?
Hmm.
Uh, and it came up in various different guises, but in general, the sense was, not to pad out the book to just make it arbitrarily more pages, but more, this is very like harsh. This is very stark. There's not a lot of transitions. There's not a lot of, bringing people up to speed slowly. And I understand why many books do it, because it makes it much easier or more comfortable to read the book. But for me, that's not what this was. This was intended to be, I already know what I'm doing. Like, I
Yeah,
know the language, I know other stuff, and I just want to figure out how this thing in Rust works, because it's weird or it's complicated.
exactly.
Um, and so I wanted to try to capture that mindset of, I'm reading this not because I want to read a book. I'm reading this because I need an answer to why the fuck this is doing what it does. And so I wrote it that way, and it does mean that, it ends up very punchy. Like, it goes from one point to another, and it
Yep.
makes it very dense. And I see that in some of the reviews too, right? Of people being like, this is a very dense book, and it really is, because that's sort of the intention.
Yeah.
But I do think that means that it is more useful for those who are looking for, the deep technical dives, as opposed to a walkthrough.
Yeah. One big thing that I really liked about it is like, even what's it called, like Too Many Damn Lists. That's another. I actually found that to be a very excellent article. But it's like it's inundated with a bunch of very beginner friendly sections. And so like I'm trying to zoom through these beginner friendly items, but then in the middle of one of those beginner friendly items is like that little piece of information you're just like, "Oh my goodness." Right? Like I just didn't know that the order of enums can cause some sort of null optimization for this, right? Like but I would have missed that because it's explaining enums, which are very trivial, and then explains some types, and you're like, yeah, keep going. Where's the actual thing? And you miss that one little bit that's like super informative. That's why I love this, or I love the book, is because it was just bits that were informative, right? I didn't have to battle through, okay, explain what a trait is for a long time. Show me examples of how to use an if statement, right? I get all that away. I want the meat.
I think what happened there was actually the sort of, I forget what it's called, like the curse of success or something, right? Where too many linked lists started out being very light on that kind of a side. Like there was very light on explanation. It was more like, here are the codes. And what happened was people were really excited about it. They felt as though it conveyed a lot of information. And so more and more people started linking to it in more and more contexts,
Mm,
including, hey, I'm interested in Rust. Where do I start? Or I'm just trying to do a linked list in Rust to get started. And everyone linked to this article. And then you end up with more and more people looking at it that don't have the same
yep.
technical background. And so you end up having to fill in more of the gaps so that it becomes an intro article as well. Um,
Interesting. Yeah, I
I
guess I
think
never
that's
thought
what
about that way.
happened.
Yeah, because that's almost tragic in some sense that it
Yeah.
became it addressed two audiences, right? And that's always the hardest thing possible. I'm happy you didn't take that approach. I mean, though I can understand why someone in a more beginner kind of position would find that to be very useful, but it seems like it's really hard to do well to have something geared towards beginners and intermediates, right?
Oh yeah,
Or
it's you can't do it. I mean, I think in general you just need to know your audience when developing any teaching resource, but especially a book, because the attention is like so tenuous at best, right? You
Mhm.
need to make sure that people actually stay engaged, and you lose the beginners if you go into too much detail without the guiding in between, and you lose the intermediate people if you have lots of the guiding in between. There's nothing in between those two.
Yeah.
But for me, like this tied back to the title of the book actually, where I had a long discussion with the publisher about what should the title of the book be, and it started up being like idiomatic Rust, or
Classic
next
phrase.
steps for Rust, like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, which doesn't really mean anything. Like,
Yeah.
what does idiomatic mean?
Yeah, it means the beholder feels like
Right.
this is the best way to do it. That's what it feels
Right,
like.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so when I proposed Rust for Rustaceans, they were like, "Oh, but this is going to limit the audience of the book because people need to know what Rustation is to even know whether the book is for them." And I'm like, "That's kind of the point.
Yeah.
That is intentional."
That's awesome.
Like there's a group of people that I don't want to buy this book because it's not for them. They would just be confused.
Interesting. Have since writing this book, have you received any hate for it? Have you had any like hard moments because of it? Because obviously there's a lot of people like me to say, "Hey, this was a great experience. You did awesome on it." But have you had kind of the opposite where you've received more harsher words?
Um, Not too bad. I have certainly had some. I think the harshest I've had, and this is arguably not very harsh, is that the book is just text.
Hmm.
Like it is a giant, block of text, and there's a little bit of code in there, but ultimately it's a lot of text. And this book would have been good if it had more code examples, more diagrams, more illustrations.
Yeah.
And I understand that criticism. I don't disagree with it. I think, if I had more time that I put into writing it, or even maybe for a second edition or a third edition or whatnot, maybe I'll be able to put that in. But I think those things are less important,
Yeah.
right? I think what the book wants to do is give you the hook, right? You can do all the following research yourself, but you
Yeah.
can't discover things on your own quite as easily. I want to tell you that there is a thing called trait coherence, and this is roughly what it is. And then if you want more detail, go read about it in the other resources that exist.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. If you have an affiliate link for your own Rust book, throw it in the chat now. That way you can double dip into that sweet Amazon right now. That'd be sweet. Yeah, that'd be great. And John, where can we find you? Where do you normally kind of have an outlet for all the things you're working on, for updates? What's your favorite places?
so I generally hang out on Twitter.
Okay.
That's the place you'll find me.
And that's
So
just John Who, right?
twitter.com/JohnWho.
Yep.
Yep.
I have you right here. There you go. I have your Twitch and your Twitter, which are named the same, John Who.
Amazing. Yeah, exactly.
Is it Who
And
because no one can pronounce your last name?
it didn't start that way, but it has become that way.
John Who?
Which I think is great.
Don't worry.
Yeah, John Who.
You
Who's
can't
this
do
John
it.
guy?
Yeah.
And a lot of people assume that I'm Korean because of my username, which is funny because I'm very not Korean.
You don't strike me as Korean, at least.
Yeah. But I hang out a lot on Twitter, and I try to be fairly like high signal, low noise as an account.
Okay.
So like I do, random Twitter threads about Rust or rants about Rust, and I don't do a lot of like weird other stuff. So that might be interesting. I do streams on Twitch and YouTube simultaneously, so you can catch me on either of those.
Okay.
And then all the uploads I do go to YouTube afterwards.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a part of this. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you had a lot of fun on this.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks
Awesome.
for having me.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned more. I do need I still need to read over the async section in that book. That is my.
Yeah, I mean, if you read it and then go, this is all shit, just let me know and we can have another chat about that. Ooh,
I know. Can you believe that it just appeared in front of me?
That's amazing.
Yep. It's lunchtime is what it is. So.
I believe that.
All right.
Yeah, I gotta go eat too.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I had a great time.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So everyone in the audience, please go to his Twitch, go to his Twitter, give him a follow, and then make sure you say a lot of stupid things on the internet to him. That'd be great, right?
Yes, please do.
Yeah,
I love
please
stupid.
do.